Welcome to the podcast, Authors of the Pacific Northwest, where I connect authors with their readers. We also talk all about the author's inspiration, their journey to publication, and the authors will educate me and you, the listener, all about the business of writing. I'm your host, Vikki J. Carter, also known as the Author's Librarian. This podcast episode of the Authors of the Pacific Northwest is proudly sponsored by Mark Dawson's Self-Publishing Formula 101. The Self-Publishing Formula 101 is an extensive course that I have taken where you learn everything you need to know from the moment you type the end on your manuscript. It has over 30 hours of straightforward video guides to take out all the guesswork of self-publishing your own work. It gives you tons and tons of information, so I highly endorse Mark Dawson's Self-Publishing 101 formula. It's suitable for beginners at intermediate level, and even advanced self-publishing authors will find tons of resources. It only launches 2 times a year, so get on my show notes on my website and follow the link so you can sign up for interest if you're interested in Mark Dawson's 101 Self-Publishing Formula, which is a proud sponsor of this episode. Now, to the show. So hey there, podcast listener. Thank you so much for coming back to the Authors of the Pacific Northwest. And today I have the honor of introducing you to Dede Montgomery. So Dede, say hello.
Hi. Thanks, Vikki. It's great to be here.
Thank you, Dede. I appreciate you coming. Dede found me from my website and asked to join the fun, and I'm so glad she did because I can't wait to hear all about her history and her writing and her books. So let's get started with a little bit about yourself. Kind of tell us where you reside out here in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, thanks. Well, normally I reside in a small town kind of just south of Portland, West Lynn, but today I'm actually on the coast on the Long Beach Peninsula in near Ocean Park, where I took a couple days off, but I ended up working here some today before I head back.
It is always the way, right? We take time off and we're still working, but nice. So you're pretty close to me. I'm in Southwest Washington. So I always say I'm a Portlander from people that don't know where I live because it's easier because usually they say, oh, you're from Washington, so you must live in Seattle. And I'm like, Washington's a big state, people.
Yeah.
And I'm closer to Portland. So that's funny. How's the weather there at the beach?
Oh, it's been a little rainy, a little gray. The sun peeks out once in a while. It's great. I love this kind of weather during this time of year. Me too. I'm anxious to get back to the coast. We went to Astoria this last weekend just for a quick little jaunt. And I'm like, that's not far enough. I got to get to the coast. I'm going to make it. So what do you do? Are you a full-time author? Do you have a day job? Kind of tell me a little bit about that. I have a full-time day job. And, many of us know how challenging that is. Yeah. I counted it up this year. I have 36 years experience working as a safety and health professional and a certified industrial hygienist, which is something that prior to the pandemic, many people didn't even know what that was.
And then you got really busy, right?
Yeah. So I do that full time. My last 16 or so years, I've worked at OHSU in the research side. I work for a research institute, and I kind of do outreach and education around our themes of workplace safety, health, and well-being.
Well, that's fantastic. That's really great. And you're also writing. So you're trying to juggle all of that. Yeah. Oh, so you know my pain.
I know your pain. And I think, and I've been talking with some newer writers, or not newer by age, but newer to writing. And, what I really know is, especially if you have other things in your life, you have to be compelled. Mm-hmm. You have to be driven. Yeah. Right. Yeah. To get that workout.
Yeah, it's so true. Before we hit record, this will be out, and you guys will probably know this already that are my followers because I'll be announcing it in my newsletter here soon. I'm taking what I'm going to call a creative sabbatical. I had to create something to make me feel good about stopping a few things. So I will be putting a close on the podcast for at least a while, and I don't have a deadline. So if you're listening to this and you're like, oh no, what does that mean? It just means I'm writing my book, because I did have so many irons in the fire with the podcast and promoting the podcast and trying to write. I did get one book out in the meantime. It was that nonfiction book, which has been helpful. But then after that, everybody wants me to talk about that book. And I'm like, I want to write the silly fiction book. So I had to put a pause on some things. So the podcast is going to be one of them. So I'm so glad we got to fit you in before I decided to take my sabbatical.
I feel really lucky about that too, but I fully understand. I have my own issues like that going on.
Yeah, I'm calling it a sabbatical because I think I'll come back. I just don't know what version it will be. So tell us a little bit about your genre, what you've written, and what, kind of talk us through, because some authors have multi-genres. Some authors write one book in 5 genres and they mix it all together. Tell us what yours is.
Yeah, I will, because I was kind of later to the game and actually getting a book out. I've always loved to write, and I've journaled my entire life. I took a creative writing class or 2 in college before I went this other direction. But I have written several genres. And what is interesting to me in thinking about this, and I commonly share that I'm a 6th generation Oregonian.
Yes.
Within that, I come from a family of writers and readers. And so I really think about how much that influences us. I don't know that there's a genetic thing, it makes you a better writer, but I think what it really does is makes you, it's like anything. When parents expose kids to things, they're like, oh, that's what you do. So in my family, we read a lot. At least I did. Not all my brothers as much as me, but my parents did. And my grandparents did. And my great grandparents did. And as a writer, and I'll get to my genre, but it's my father was a journalist, very much more kind of, nonfiction stuff. He would never have been able to complete a book. Yeah. But he did a lot of, he wrote in the, the shipping news, and he wrote for the Port of Portland, and he was a real maritime historian.
Oh, that's fantastic. What a cool resource.
Yeah, it's very cool. And that's kind of what I'll get to why I started writing my book. Yeah. But then my grandfather was also very into history, and he published 3 books on, really kind of Northwest history. In the 30s, 1930s. And his most known was a book called The White-Headed Eagle, which is about John McLaughlin.
I know who that is.
Yeah, right. His father managed J.K. Gill's store, and his grandfather was J.K. Gill. So my great-great-grandfather, and I bring all that up because, books have just been such a part of my life. And so my first book, which came out in 2017, is a memoir. Mm-hmm. And that's called My Music Man. That's the one where I weave 7 generations of my family stories into looking at the life of me, and particularly my relationship with my dad. Uh-huh. And I wrote that because he died. Uh-huh. I don't know if I ever would have written it, right?
Yeah, it's therapeutic, but it's also tells great stories, right?
Yeah. And so as I started writing, part of it was I want to save these stories because he was such an awesome storyteller. And I'm lucky because of historians in our family. I had easy access to a lot of photos and stories. I had to do some, but that's, you talk to people who do memoir or nonfiction and how much time is spent researching.
Yeah, or even fiction, good fiction.
Well, yeah.
Will have good research behind it too. So you're lucky. You had it at your fingertips.
I was lucky. So I wrote that book, and I think pretty early on as I started writing it, I was like, I think I want to try to publish this because there are some really interesting stories. My greats, showed up in Oregon, Oregon country, it wasn't even the territory, right? In 1837 and 1840. And so, that's awesome. We weren't talking Washington State. We weren't talking Oregon State.
Yeah.
So then, awesome. And when I started writing that book, and I did go traditional publishing, and so I can talk about that. But when I signed the contract, with the publisher, I realized I needed to do a couple of things. I needed to work on my writing, right? In addition to getting as good of a product out as I could because I'm newer to this.
Yeah.
Even though I've written in the science world and all that.
Yeah, it's different.
It's different. Plus, it'd be nice to find a few followers.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
So, right?
Yeah.
So I started that blog. And I love blogging. And you mentioned
I hate blogging.
Right.
Hate it.
I love blogging, and I have to be careful because as I started to write more books, it would be like, well, wait, do I blog or do I work on a book? And I've been able to balance both. I would tell you since 2016, I have posted, I think it's like about 230 blogs.
Oh, that's awesome.
and that's been nice for me. And so I kind of did that, and I'm still doing that actively. And I kind of do bring in history, but I bring in a lot of kind of grief and sadness over losses I've had. And I went
to your blog.
Oh,
and
did you?
Started doing some reading as a little bit of research for our interview. And I noticed you were very prolific in blogging. And it's funny because it's something that I kind of started out with. They tell you to do everything, right? Get on social media, do this and do that. And I started the podcast and I started blogging, and I hated the deadline of the blog part of it. I was just like, and so I decided if I don't enjoy something very much, I'm not going to do it. So I put the blog aside. But what's funny is that now that I'm making space to write a little more, I was thinking of going back but doing how-to blogging on my Librarian research page for authors, because I think that'd be interesting for me to do.
I agree. I think it depends on your personality. When I first, because I'm kind of a researcher, so I looked at should I blog, right?
Oh, I've read lots of things about blogging.
And the advice was, if you're really well known and people love to buy your books, no, just write a new book.
Yeah.
But if they don't, then blog.
Blog, exactly. And I started a blog ages ago before I even started. The whole idea of writing was very scary to me. So I started a food blog where my husband and I, we love to eat, but I always love everything regional. So I wanted to keep it a Pacific Northwest regional. You can't find this blog, so don't go looking for it, people. But what I did is, he's a great photographer. So we would go out to all these restaurants all up and down the I-5 corridor from down South Oregon, all the way up to Seattle when we had time, and we would try restaurants. We'd hear about them and all sorts of restaurants. He'd take pictures and we would critique it because we always critique food. I mean, that's all we do. And so I'm like, I could do this. That was fun. And I loved that. But it was a time thing. I was like, I really had visions of becoming a food writer, but it never happened. I wanted to get paid to, write about food.
Well, and there's a reason some of us don't get to seriously writing until later in our life. My kids are grown up. Now my parents have both died, and I took a lot of care of them. So there is this thing that happens, even if we're still working, out, kind of our day job. Yeah. Maybe if we're lucky, right? I mean, kind of luck.
Well, no, I understand. I'm in that transition of, still working full-time. Kids are really out on their own having babies, but they still need me. Thank goodness they need me.
I'm with you there.
Lots and lots. And it's that juggle. It's the big juggle. Yeah. So you got your memoir out.
Okay.
We're rabbit trailing. I apologize, listeners. So you got your memoir out. You traditionally published that. And did you get an agent and how did that go for you?
Yeah. So I'm if people who know me, I'm a very impatient person, which is not a good way to be in this business.
I am too.
And so I joined Willamette Writers as I was kind of getting my book out, which I thought was awesome. It was a newer community for me, and I learned some things, and I went to some conferences. But I did pitch a few agents.
Yeah.
And I gave it about 5 or 10. And I was like, forget it. Let's just look at the publishers.
Yeah.
But I did want to be traditionally published. And I really wanted an Oregon publisher. But what you learn is you've got to look at what genre they're interested in. Yeah. I knew I needed to go for a smaller press. I mean, I'm not going to be published by, not to say never, but, for my first book, I was realistic.
Yeah.
And I did find a publisher that, as it's turned out, I've been really thrilled with. I feel that they're very loyal to me. I feel loyal to them. They're based in Northern California, Bedazzled Ink Publishing. And so,
what a great name.
Yeah. And, they really specialize. And this was part of what drew them to me. And I felt like it was right, was they really want to tell the stories of women not just what you read in the bestseller list, right? They really wanted to show the different lives and diversity of women. And so they don't care what gender you are as a writer, but they want a protagonist, right? That is, female. And so that really, for my memoir, that really spoke to me because I grew up in a very kind of full boy male kind of household. And so I was traditionally published. And then after that, so I have a total of 4 books. My second one, I thought, this would be fun to do creative. So it's literary fiction, which is my favorite genre to read.
Yeah, mine too.
Okay, cool. Yeah. I tell people, if you want someone who ties everything up with a bow and you know everything that you need to know, that's not me as a writer, and that's not me as a reader.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I don't want happy endings, and I don't want formulaic endings. I mean, I'm comfortable with cozy mysteries because I know I kind of know how it's going to go, and I'll read those. Yeah. But I'm a historical fiction and literary fiction. Historical fiction, and it has to be good historical fiction because I'll go look it up as a librarian.
I think that we probably read really similar things.
We probably do,
And so what I did, and this felt to me the big stretch because, a memoir, I like to tell people I didn't really change anything. I mean, they're my memories, right? Yeah, but I wasn't creating stuff, and that knowingly at least. And so I had this thing happened to me when I was about 10. We lived on the Willamette River in Wilsonville, and I put a note in a bottle, and I wanted a friend because I was kind of lonely. Like I had 4 brothers and I did go to school, but back then, it was a little town, and I just thought it'd be cool to have a new friend. And so I put a note in a bottle, right? So, and it was amazing because about, a few months later, I got a package in the mail. And it had my bottle, it had my original note, and it had a new note, and a man living, downriver in West Lynn.
That's so cool.
I like to believe he was on the other side of the falls. So my bottle went over the falls. And he sent me back, and it kind of was the whole thing about, hey, it was so great. And he calculated like river miles of distance. And he kind of said, I'm sending it all back so you can try again.
Oh, that's so cool.
So that was the idea for Beyond the Ripples. But my bottle goes way further. It goes to Westport, Oregon. And it creates a whole bunch of meetings of different people. And so a lot of my
cool.
A lot of my writing is very much about connections and kind of serendipity a little bit. Like, I really believe that. I believe like I make these decisions every day and talking to somebody. Yeah. And like I have a conversation that I would never know otherwise.
Yeah. You put that energy out and you're going to get it back.
Yeah. So, and with that one, I think I pitched a couple other a couple other press. I'm like, because my publisher wanted it. So that was my decision. Yeah. And then I did nonfiction. Then I kind of looked at all those blogs I had, and I'd had a few people say, hey, Dede, these are great blogs. And it'd be easier if it was just in like a Kindle kind of
format.
PDF.
Yeah.
So I did that, and I did that on my own. I mean, my publisher helped me with a little formatting, but because I knew I had a lot of high resolution photos, and no one's going to pay $40 or $50 for this book.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I did the ebook, and I have not sold many copies. And in fact, I really priced it just to get it out.
Yeah.
I didn't promote it much, and I did just moved it to 99 cents.
Ooh, so everybody listen, jump on.
It
called,
sounds like
a really. You have a lot of family history.
I do have.
I might have to go check it out.
it's called Then, Now, and In Between. Place, Memories, and Loss in Oregon.
Oh, I'm definitely going to check it out because it's right in my genre of research. Because right now I'm currently working on this book, and I'm having a really hard time finding in the 1920s in my area. I have an appointment with our librarian to go into our library, our big city room. I'm looking for firsthand accounts. I don't want just the facts. I don't want, I want to find some journals, some diaries, something to help build this picture of the the time setting that I'm writing this in, and I'm struggling, and I'm a librarian and I'm struggling. I'm like messaging every library in Washington State. Oh my gosh, do we have anything in my area? And they're like, don't think so.
Well, I'm sure you do this because you're a librarian, but like for me, the research that I did need to do, I mean, I really relied on the Oregon Historical Society. My greats had connections with Willamette University, right? And with a couple of museums there. So that was a big piece.
Wow.
And then there's the Museum of the Oregon Territory. And so I think, right, I mean, I think that's where you're going to find that and those people. Yeah, good for you.
I'm on the hunt. And so what's funny with me is that because I love research so much, but I also want to make sure my writing feels accurate. If somebody from the 1920s that lived in my area, because that's where the book is set in, picks this up, I want them to feel like it's Longview where Long Bell put their, I want them to feel that. It doesn't mean it's going to be I want the setting and the time to almost be a character of itself, so.
Well, and that it's like setting time and place are kind of a character, right? It sounds like
we never know how long this is going to take people. So, but I'm working on that. I'm loving that part. So I'm very interested in your ebook. I will go grab it. Everybody else listening that's interested in Oregon history, you probably should grab it too, because there's firsthand accounts or firsthand retelling from families is like gold mine.
In fact, you should check out the blog I just posted with some old stories that I've more recently learned of a family story that nobody shared.
Ooh, I will. How exciting. Okay, Dede, so you stopped for a minute. So you were telling about the latest blog post before we went on camera that you would just put up that has a lot of history. So tell us all about that, because I want my readers to also know.
Yeah, it's called, I'm kind of looking it up real quick to make sure I get the name right. It's called, it's my most recent one. And anyone who likes to read blogs, I do really enjoy it, and I never run out of content. So Time Traveling to the Secrets of Our Past.
Yes.
Part one, I posted a week or so ago, and part two, I just posted a few days ago.
Yeah, I saw the parts and I was like, I want to get into this. This sounds very interesting to me. So fantastic. Well, listeners know I will have your website and also your blog attached to my show notes so they can go to it. And I'm going to be reading this too. So I think we got to book 2. You have 2 more books, right?
Let's see. No, I think
where we at?
Let's see. Right, we did the memoir, the first literary fiction.
Oh yes.
Then the blog to book.
Oh, okay, your blog book, and then what was your 4th book?
In my 4th book, I just released in January.
Oh, congratulations!
Called Humanity's Grace, and I did use I went back to my publisher for that. And, I did the same thing. I kind of like, I should go, maybe I'll go real big here. Right. And I'll kind of go pitch, and, it's hard, right? There's so many books out there. And it kind of came back to, I have a really comfortable relationship with my publisher. They've been really working hard to make things better for their authors. And this is what I've really learned, and I bet you have too, which is you have to decide, what is it for me, right? Mm-hmm. Like, what are the most important things?
Yeah.
I love to write. I love it when I get to engage with people who have read my stuff and want to talk about it. And no, I'm not a bestseller. And it's, of course I'd like more people to buy my book, but I'm not here to try to make more money. I'm not going to write to make more money.
Yeah.
I'm going to write what's from my heart.
Yeah. I hear you on that one.
Right. And so I think with that, I was like, okay, then let me go with, Bedazzled Ink. And this book came together pretty quickly. So this is a little different. And was really fun because, I'm not a traditionally trained writer, right? And so, but I read a lot, and we all have our thoughts. And so this Humanity's Grace, and I don't know if the cover shows the bridge.
My favorite colors. Yeah.
And this is I would technically call this a linked short story collection.
Oh, very cool.
But I have an author friend, Jeff, who kind of said it's actually a novel in stories.
Oh, nice. I like that terminology.
I like that because it kind of reads that way.
Yeah, that's nice.
And yet my whole goal here was it has 15 short stories and each one does need to be read, sit on its own. Mm-hmm. But when you read all of them and you read them in the order I put them in, right, mm-hmm. you getting a much bigger picture, and it is a story. And what was interesting about how I got to it was after I finished Beyond the Ripples, and I was blogging, but I was like, okay, I need to do another book. I got something in me. I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
And I started writing a sequel for Beyond the Ripples, just playing with it.
Yeah.
But it just didn't feel like what I wanted to do. But what it did do was the very first part that I started that with is a story in this book.
Oh, that's wonderful. I love that.
Right? So a couple characters from Beyond the Ripples show up in this book, along with a lot of other characters, many that had never meet.
Yes.
And I can talk about what holds them together, but it's based mostly in Astoria, because that is where one of the characters from the other book lived.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So all your books are in the Pacific Northwest in the Oregon territory.
They are.
That's awesome. I love that.
I have a couple scenes in Seattle in each of my books.
That's still
but it's been super fun to
really
concentrate on Oregon.
That's really cool.
And a lot of river theme.
Mm-hmm.
I have a lot of river theme, especially in my memoir, because so much family story around the river. But there's river themes in maybe a little less in Humanity's Grace. But yeah.
I think that's a part of being a Pacific Northwest. Now, I'm not original. We moved here when I was 18 months old, so I will claim that I am. I was raised in Washington my whole life, very close to the Oregon coast. And I feel like there's, for us real true Pacific Northwesters and writers in the Pacific Northwest, water, rivers, and ocean is a huge theme for us, not only because it rains so much, but because there is so much life and activity that's happened around these rivers and so much history. I mean, the Columbia River, if anybody travels here from outside and has never seen the Columbia River, and even from the East Coast, you see the Mississippi River, and if you've seen the Columbia, there's not much to be impressed about the Mississippi River. You look at the Columbia, you're like, are you kidding me? It's enormous.
Well, I love how you put it in the context of history. So, for example, when my great-great-great-grandmother and grandfather came out, right, they, how would they get from point A to point B? Well, they took sailing ship up the Columbia to Vancouver, and then she was put in a canoe get up to Nisqually, and then the only other part, canoe plus a cart and horse.
Oh my
because,
goodness.
The rivers were how we could get around.
Yeah. And I've been doing a lot of research lately and looking at old photos prior to the 1920s. So I do think there's a book brewing before, like a prequel to the book that I have now. And I've been seeing a lot of where the piers were at on the rivers. And so now you just see the pilings, the old pilings. And then to see the pictures of how much life happened on the rivers, from homes to actual mills and canneries and factories, everything happened on our river, all of them. And we have so many of them. So it's so fascinating. So I love that that's a big theme in your books. So we have been rambling on about the Pacific Northwest. Obviously, we love it. So I tell my listeners all the time, if you're not from the Pacific Northwest, it rains all the time and you'll hate it. But no, we love it here. So why don't we dive into your reading? Because I'm so curious to sit back and listen and enjoy it. So I will go be quiet because the dogs are in the studio with me, because we never know when they're going to bark. And I can't get their barking cut out after 4 years of podcasting. So it's all you, Dede.
It's great. And I'm going to place this a little bit since it's a collection of short stories. So as I mentioned, there's 15 stories and there's an event that happens. And it's a tragic event in this case. And really my challenge here was when something happens, especially a negative thing, but it could be positive too. Think of all the spinoff, right? Spinoff among people that don't even know each other. And so I had that, and I really believe in these connections. And I also believe in this ability, that we all have to be, kind is a strong word. Maybe it's grace. It's this way we can be sometimes when we don't even realize it, that makes such a huge difference in somebody else's life. And so where I'm going to jump in is I'm going in towards the end here, story 13. And we're going to meet a character named Celia, this is the only story she's in where you see her name. But you realize as you get to the story that she's been in 2 other scenes. So I'm kind of referring to her as my bystander. And I'm not going to start at the beginning because I'm going to read about 8 minutes or something like that. Celia saw something and it stayed with her. And she cannot figure out why she can't let go of it. And that is part of what her behavior has been. And so I'm going to just start reading. And there we go. So, and this is right in kind of Astoria, in a residential part of kind of close to downtown Astoria. As Celia neared the block, it was easy to identify which house Jim had described. Gray weathered siding, front dirty white picket fence collapsing in a corner, a car in the driveway that looked as if it had been abandoned for years. She would have preferred calling ahead, but she did not even know the man's name. The mailbox listed a nameless, barely legible address. Her heart thumped loudly against her chest wall as she walked up the path toward the house. She ignored internal warnings that she could be walking into danger as she knew she had to get through this. It was the only next step. 3 concrete stairs led up to the door, and they were barren of anything except a rolled plastic-wrapped advertisement. She picked up the ad and set it next to the wall of the house and waited at the top landing, hoping she might hear something. Nothing. She ignored the doorbell and knocked on the door 4 times, softly, nervously, stopping to listen. This time, more boldly, she rapped harder on the door, once, twice, several more. She put her ear to the door and then quickly backed off. Coming, she heard in the distance. Stomach acid seeped into places in Celia's gut where she was sure it should not go. And she shifted her weight from one foot to the other. Was she hungry after skipping breakfast or terrified? Anyone who knew her would be shocked by this act, rarely impulsive. The door swung open and a wiry man with thinning gray hair peered at her. He stooped forward, and for a moment, Celia worried he might lose his balance. He continued to stare at her, and Celia backed away from the door, speechless. Yes? What now? He had on baggy sweatpants and slippers and sounded irritated, like she had interrupted something. Hi, I wondered if you had a few minutes to talk. The man looked puzzled. What? I can't hear you. And well, I can't stand here all day unless you want to pick me up off the ground. Without another word, the man turned away from her, leaving the door open, and retreated back into the house. Celia watched him hesitate before sitting in a plaid recliner across the room by the window. She looked around outside, worried that a neighbor might think she was here to harm or rob the old guy. Not knowing what else to do, she stepped inside the house, reached back and pulled the door closed, and walked across the worn shag carpet toward him. The room smelled like mildew and old French fries. Across the small room was a pull-out couch, still unmade with sheets, and a coffee table holding dirty dishes. Who are you and what do you want? Before you sell me magazines, you should know I hardly read. Oh, and I don't have a checkbook or cash, but just go ahead, lay it out, would you? The man looked up at her. Celia spotted a chair near him, but it was covered with clothes and did not look inviting, so she remained standing. Hey, wait, he suddenly blurted. I know who you are. Oh, good, you came. Celia was startled. She turned to look behind her, thinking someone else had quietly followed her into the room. She wished she had left the front door open, feeling nervous to stupidly walk into some old guy's house, even if he seemed harmless. If not for safety, an open door might ventilate the room. She did not know what to say. Oh, yeah, the old man continued. You're that friend of my daughter. You know, my daughter visits, well, not very much, but she comes. She told me a friend of hers was moving out here. A friend would visit me. Celia caught her breath. Her bizarre morning was now transitioning into an episode of The Twilight Zone. No, I don't think so. I'm Celia. Celia, the man said, letting the S sound languish before giving a hard yeah. Not a name I've heard, I don't think. But it's lucky you found me because I didn't go to work today. I'll probably go tomorrow. Really? Celia didn't want to sound as though she didn't believe him, so she added, where do you work? Oh, down at the docks. I move the boats around, and yeah, it's a lot of work, but I've done it all my life, really. It's good. Keeps me active. She didn't want to make it obvious, but she eyed the walker on the other side of his chair. And I just need to warn you, my son might be coming by, but I haven't seen him in a few days. You probably know him, for all I know. Celia decided to follow his lead, not sure whether what he said was truth or nonsense, but leaning toward the latter. Your son? Yeah, he's a good son. We had a bit of falling out, but he came back. That's what good sons do. Daughters too, I'd say. What's your son's name? Celia asked, starting to feel like she needed to sit, but uncertain she should stay any longer, even if she needed to know about this guy's connection to Frank. Why in the world was she there? She was absolutely batty. The man stared at her blankly and then confused, glancing away to look out the window. Then he looked back at her. It's John. Yeah, his name, it's John. Celia was not one to join in on small talk if this weird conversation could be defined as it. But she could not seem to help herself. Well, when John comes, what do you do? Oh, we talk like this, except mostly he talks. I listen. We talk about boats, of course, shipwrecks, guy things. For the first time, the man smiled at her. Yeah, there's lots of shipwrecks happening around here. It's a dangerous ocean, I'd say. No, you probably don't. But we call it the graveyard. The graveyard of the ocean. Oh, and treasures. Celia wanted to help him by sharing the word Pacific, but she caught her tongue. The word treasure triggered Celia, reminding her of Jim's gold discussion. Lots of things. Yeah, he's a good boy. He hesitated, one of his eyebrows and a corner of his mouth raised. He squinted and looked down at the floor. He looked back at Celia. I'm sorry, I forgot your name. It's been nice to visit, but I need to get ready to go out soon. Thanks for telling me all those things, and I'll be sure to think about them, and we can talk about things. But you don't need to bring the newspaper, like my son does. Just so you know that. I can't really see it much, and nothing good to read in it anymore. Well, I see, Celia replied, although she didn't. Where does he live, your son, John? Oh, he lives around here. He's a good boy. Yes, he's a good boy. Okay, Celia said in a whisper. She wiped her eyes with her fists as she felt disparate pieces slowly mending together. She started to walk to the door and then turned back to him. I'm sorry, I don't know your name. How could you forget such an easy one? He laughed for the first time. Joseph. Joe is what my friends call me. Joe, Celia repeated. If I come again, can I bring you something? Oh, you don't need to bring me anything. My car's parked outside if I need supplies. Yeah, I just go get them. You go do your things. I have things to do too. Celia didn't reply but wiped her palms on her yoga pants. As she walked toward the door, she looked back to see if he was following her to the door, but Joe was slouched back in his chair and his eyes were closed. As she opened the front door, she almost bumped into a middle-aged woman pulling keys out of her purse on the front landing. Who are you? The woman asked rudely. Can I help you? Celia moved away from the door and replied softly, I was visiting Joe. Celia felt as if she was busted for stealing something. Does he live alone? Joe? Heck no, thank God. Did he let you in? The woman turned to pull the door closed. And I think I'll stop there because I don't want to give too much away.
I love it. I need to know more about Joe, though.
And I think it's okay to say that the key event that brings these different people together, some that very much knew this individual, that knew a man. There was a death. A man died. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And then you probably knew that, but I kind of just want to bring that together. And that was, his name was Frank. So thank you.
Oh, I love it. Okay, everyone. So if you were hooked like I am, definitely get on Dede's website for my show notes. I'll have probably a picture of this book featured there, so you can click right into it and get right to this particular book and check out her blog and some of the other books that she has written. So Dede, as we close out the podcast, knowing that we're still kind of in the, post-pandemic world, do you have anything that you will be available at for people to meet you, sign your book, you sign their book for them, that kind of thing?
Yeah, thank you. I love that question. And yeah, authors during the pandemic have really been hit by going to Zoom, and I've done some Zoom events. Yeah. I do have a live event. I think it's called Winecraft in Astoria in September with 2 other authors, and that will show up on their website soon. I am also looking for engagements. And one thing I'm actually thinking I'm going to do, just host either with a bookstore, or just maybe on my own, is a discussion of this book, because I have had a number of people who've read it want to talk about it. And it's very interesting to me, as all authors, to get feedback. So I might be doing that. So any of my events I do put on my website. And if you want me to come do anything, give me a call.
Let her know. So if you listen, so this is your action item. I love giving my listeners an action item. Get this book, read it, and then follow Dede for when she does that discussion, and show up and let her know you found her on the podcast, because it's always so much fun for us to know where people found us. So Dede, that sounds great. I might have to make a trip for the wine event in September. Sounds like right up my alley. We'll have to see. So thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And listeners, find her, let her know you found her from the podcast, and buy her book and write a review for sure.
Thank you so much, Vikki, and best of luck to you on all of your upcoming work.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the podcast. I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. Make sure you jump on the show notes and find the author, buy their books, write a review. And most importantly, you can find out more about me and my projects at one of my 2 websites, www.squishpin.com or theauthorslibrarian.com. And until next time, this is Vikki J. Carter, the Author's Librarian, signing off.